Well, it is 11:35 of my clock, although I suspect it is only about 20 to 11 in the Reverend Stephen Kirk's household, because I did notice that the clock on his wall was just running a little slow. So can I welcome us all back to this session of our governing body meeting. So we are on item number 18, and this is an update on our climate emergency debate that we had at a previous governing body. So before I introduce and welcome our speakers and presenters for this, I would just like to again reference the Anglican Communion, and here is my very own compass rose that is the insignia of the Anglican Communion. And this reminds us that as well as looking inwardly to our church and to our local communities, we have this duty across the world to look outwards and to hear what the effects of our daily choices are on the world outside. And when I went to the Anglican Consultative Council with Venerable Mary Stallard a couple of years ago, I heard firsthand from Christians around the world who not only were losing their income, they were losing their land. In the South Sea Islands, they live now on half the land they used to have because the rest of it has been swallowed up by the sea. And not only that, their burial grounds have been washed away, meaning that their ancestors' bones have gone or wash up on the shore. So these are terribly, terribly important issues when we talk about climate change. So again, it's the treasure of our world that is part of our job. So I'm delighted to pass over now for this session. And this is an update, so it is not a debate, but I'm sure that the whole point about it is to encourage us to ask questions of ourselves. And I'm sure that Becca and Ayub will be able to help set us on a path. So welcome to Reverend Rebecca Stevens, and a huge welcome to Ayub Khan. As a guest at a governing body, I would just remind you that we did agree that non-members have to be agreed to speak, and we absolutely wholeheartedly welcome you, Ayub, because we'd be delighted to hear from you. So thank you so much for coming, and I will hand over to you, Becca.
Chair, members of governing body, Reverend Rebecca Stevens, elected Monmouth Diocese. In April of this year, the governing body declared a climate emergency and called on all parts of the Church in Wales to respond with urgency to the net zero carbon challenge. Now, the motion at the time was described as both timely and challenging. And since then, we've witnessed lethal record-breaking temperatures in the Pacific Northwest, distressing floods in Germany, Belgium, and China, devastating wildfires in Greece and Turkey, and the warmest winter by 4 degrees ever recorded in Chile. And of course, the truly alarming climate change report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that states unequivocally that humanity is affecting the climate. And of course, closer to home, in April, the Woodland Trust pointed out that the future of green spaces in Wales were at risk, and it would be disastrous for the plants and animals in our local ecosphere. You may have seen the news recently that Lee Waters, the Deputy Climate Change Minister, has issued the call to action, as he's admitted that we're way behind where we need to be on the 86 million more tree planting target by the end of the decade. So yes, the Church in Wales Climate Emergency Declaration and call to net zero is both timely and challenging. And mentioning timely and challenging, you might have seen yesterday that the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Pope, and the Ecumenical Patriarch released a joint statement on climate change, a first such joint statement that challenges all of us. They call on everyone, whatever their belief or worldview, to endeavour to listen to the cry of the earth and of people who are poor, examining their behaviour and pledging meaningful sacrifices for the sake of the earth which God has given us. Quite profound words. I'm going to share an update with you to inform you on the progress of the net zero carbon project to date. And we'll also have input from Ayub, who was a sixth former in Crickhowell, and he's about to leave for university. He's going to Queen Mary University of London to study law and politics. So Ayub, we wish you well for that journey. But before I have the project update, I have an observation I've been asked to pass along to you. On Monday, we gathered at the Celtic Manor ICC, and if each of us had driven there, and most of us did, I confess I did, we would have collectively covered almost 24,000 miles, which is just short of driving once around the world at the equator. That's quite staggering, isn't it? And that travel alone would have produced more than 6.6 tons of carbon, compared with just 66 kilograms of carbon, or 1% of Monday's travel emissions that we'll generate today. I'll just leave you with that thought. Since April, our new climate change champion has taken up her post, and she's engaged with the church and beyond to raise awareness of the climate emergency declaration and our net zero commitment. And she's found that much good work is already taking place across the dioceses. The challenge now is for us to continue to publicise widely our growing eco and low carbon activities so that we can all be inspired by one another. Local eco projects enable congregations to reach out in mission to their wider community. And of course, while we must all make a start by doing something, and individual projects are crucial, environmental policies and principles at all levels of the church will also help guide our collective actions. So with that in mind, in June, the environmental policy of the representative body was approved, and now consideration of the impact on the climate and our net zero carbon goal can be embedded in all the decision making of the representative body. Similar policies set at all levels of the church will help steer decision making towards our net zero goal. Communication, of course, is vital, and communication of the net zero carbon challenge is vital. The dedicated climate change webpage of the Church in Wales can be found either from the main homepage or via the campaigns page. The page highlights key eco-church and net zero carbon resources, and of course the latest provincial climate news. And from today, I'm pleased to report that the climate change page now contains a link to a call to action button. So you can submit your suggestions or comments on any aspect of the net zero directly to our climate change champion. So I do encourage you to use that button. The Net Zero Carbon Project also benefits from the support of the Church in Wales Environmental Group, or the acronym CHASE, which is a small group of keen and experienced staff from across departments and dioceses who are available to offer email support and advice. And of course, many of you have supported the project already by kindly responding to the recent InScope online survey, which as a member of the governing body you were asked to complete. Last month's climate consultation sought feedback and advice on what church activities and areas to include in our net zero target. Because of course, before we can measure our carbon footprint and identify ways to progress to net zero, we need to know the activities that we're going to analyse in the first place. So after the online consultation, I'm pleased to confirm that the Net Zero Carbon Project of the Church in Wales will include as in scope and energy use of the following buildings: bishops' houses, cathedrals and other ancillary buildings, churches, church halls, diocesan offices, St Paddan's Institute, parsonages and the provincial office. We're also investigating the inclusion and contribution of glebe land, and will also include fuel used for church-related reimbursable travel. So now that we know that, we can look to calculate a broad carbon footprint for the church. It was also agreed from the results of the survey to exclude as outer scope voluntary aided and voluntary controlled schools and emissions from our waste and water. The carbon emissions from schools and waste fall under the accounting of the relevant local authority already, and Dŵr Cymru and Severn Trent Water already have similar net zero goals to decarbonise the water system. But of course, being excluded from the carbon footprint calculations does not mean we cannot strive to reduce our waste generation and water use. And of course, we must work closely with our schools and engage with our young people who challenge us directly with their demands and ambitions. We must learn from them. At our next meeting of the governing body, a net zero carbon action plan will be presented. the aim of which will be to offer guidance and a roadmap to encourage and inform all parts of the Church. And for us to succeed, we will need a bottom-up approach led by the dioceses, mission and ministry areas, churches and membership, an approach that will include and involve all of us. Net zero carbon is both timely and challenging. I'm now going to hand over to Ayub, who will be presenting us with a few facts and figures on climate emergency and relating that to how he interprets the findings and how that challenges all of us. I'm looking forward to his presentation. So Ayub, over to you.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for inviting me to speak at the governing body of Wales on the pressing issue of climate change. I'm sure you're aware of yesterday's news. Pope Francis and the Archbishop of Canterbury, as well as the Orthodox Ecumenical Patriarch, asked Christians to pray that world leaders at the United Nations Climate Change Conference in November in Glasgow to make courageous choices. Whatever happens in the world in reference to climate change, people are either angry, disappointed, indifferent, or in denial. Positively angry would be someone like Greta Thunberg, and completely in denial would be the Donald Trumps of the world. I myself am not an angry activist, but a disappointed one. Disappointed with my own actions, saddened by the lack of effort demonstrated by domestic and foreign governments, and the failure of my elders to regard the reality of climate change. Climate change is not a myth or a fairy tale, nor is it fiction, but fact and truth. It is undeniably the biggest threat we face. It could be argued that the collective phrase global warming is deceptive. It doesn't necessarily sound menacing, threatening, or ominous. In fact, to us Brits shivering on our chilly, lonesome island, it sounds rather appealing. I think most of us would cherish a few more blinks under the sun's beam and the weather a few degrees warmer. But it seems that the phrase global warming is misleading because it doesn't identify the actualities as our unique, precious, and marvelous globe warms. In school, statistics was the component of maths which I enjoyed most, simply because the math was relatable, almost tangible, and could easily be identified in society. I would like to inform you of some alarming statistics surrounding global warming. 2010 to 2019 was the hottest decade in recorded history. Record-breaking temperatures have become the norm over the past decade as our globe warms at an exponential rate. There were 99 tropical storms in 2019, and because of this, a true tragedy which pains us all is that 6.7 million people were displaced from their homes by natural disasters, with the number continuing to rise every single year. Sadly, most of these people originate from lower economic backgrounds. Therefore, little, if any, aid is provided by internal and external governments. People are left homeless, penniless, and starving, rarely punished by their own mistakes, but by the actions of those in privileged circumstances, or those who plunder the earth for its resources, causing climate change. In this year alone, we have witnessed on our TV screens the record-breaking heat waves and devastating fires in Canada, North America, Australia, and Greece. Also, torrential rain, landslides, and flooding in Indonesia, India, Germany, and London, to name a few. Simultaneously, the climate issue is both the most straightforward and complicated issue humanity has ever faced. Straightforward because we know and understand what we must do to limit the imminent and long-term repercussions of our negligence. To achieve success, we must stop the emissions of greenhouse gases and raise awareness of countries and corporations with the greatest carbon footprint and challenge them to make massive changes. Complicated and problematic because modern economic systems revolve around the profitable schemes of institutions who rely on burning tons of fossil fuels and thereby damaging our ecosystem in order to create uninterrupted economic growth. As humans, we are easily influenced. Often we are inspired by anti-climate propaganda. Let's not kid ourselves. Only a year ago, the former leader of the free world actively advocated against climate change, utilizing pseudoscience and God knows what. To counteract this, we should closely observe objective scientific data to understand the repercussions of climate change. But more importantly, take into account that as Christians, we are custodians, gatekeepers, and stewards of God's marvelous, bountiful creation of earth. It is our duty to safekeep our planet. But personally, ask yourself, have I taken the responsibility to fulfill God's commission? I would like to read to you a short section of the poem Webcam the World, written by Heather McHugh. The modern poem is a warning to everyone. Get all of it, set up the shots, at every angle, run them online, 24/7. Get beautiful stuff like scenery and greenery and style, and get the ugliness like cruelty and quackery and rue. There's nothing unastonishing, but get that too. We have to save it all now that we can, and while. Do close-ups with electron microscopes and vaster pans with planet cams. It may be getting close to our last chance. Will we in 50, 60, 70 years be only left with videos and photos of our extraordinary home? Will the seven wonders be destroyed by natural disasters? What will be left of our astonishing reefs? Is the poet correct? Are we getting close? Is it our last chance? I appeal to your humanity and the possible future of your children and grandchildren. Often people are concerned about their legacy. What will I leave behind? What is my legacy? We should all take into account the legacy we will leave behind. Have we been good custodians? Have we educated our children, colleagues, schoolmates, children, parents about the dangers of global warming? Have we challenged councils, politicians, corporations, world leaders? The beautiful thing about the climate issue is that it is not denominational or restricted by borders, religion, and ethnicity. It affects us all. Our intellect and money is being invested in a collective future which should benefit everyone. Growing up, I was always told of the importance, the concept of global citizenship, its importance towards maintaining peace and equality. As global citizens, we must unite in the single, selfless goal to create a future worth living in. Let your legacy be left in the security and well-being of our planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayub, for that timely and challenging presentation. Those are the words of the day. I think, governing body, I urge you to ask yourself this question: have we taken responsibility to safeguard God's creation? I think I'll join you, Ayub, in being a disappointed activist. Chair, I'm very happy to receive comments and questions at this point.
Thank you, Becca, and a huge thank you to Ayub. I can see that our future is assured. in the hands of people like yourself, Ayub. I'm going to invite people to question, but again, thinking of our compass rose, you know, Jesus shall reign where'er the sun doth his successive journeys run. So not just the whole world, but the whole of Wales. And we have, you know, you in Monmouth are in a semi-rural, semi-urban diocese. We have a huge variety around Wales. How can people actually embed good practice? So whilst we're looking for other points to come up, could you think about that? Simon, have we got anybody who would like to come and make a comment or ask a question?
Yes, Chair, I call Justin Davis.
Welcome, Justin. Please introduce yourself.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfectly, thank
Justin
you.
Davis, elected clerical Swansea and Brecon, chairman, members of governing body. Thank you to Rebecca and her colleague for the presentation. Rebecca asked a question of how many of us travelled by public transport to the ICC on Monday, and I did deliberately, because I wanted to just see how easy it was to access that site. I have to say, it took a lot of hard work to work out how to do the journey, and it took me a lot more time than if I'd simply driven the 68 miles from where I live in southwest Swansea or Gower to the ICC. I did, however, according to the website I used, saved 68% of the carbon I would have used if I'd driven my car. And I'm very pleased to say that the bus that took me from Newport up to as close as the ICC as possible was indeed an electric bus. So even more carbon reduction. But what I think it did say to me was that we have a lot of work to do as governing body to make sure that the places we use for our meetings are public transport accessible, and we meet in a way that actually enables public transport use to be made the most of. I think I left home at about 5:20 in the morning in order to drive, then catch a train, then catch a bus to get to the ICC in time for the meeting, adequately to get to the ICC in time for the meeting to start. And it was a good venue, so I protest not about the venue. So I just hope that as this work continues and develops, that we are able to give more and more practical support to people in making journeys which, in a great sense, as Rebecca explained to us, are high carbon introducers. And I just leave that comment and thought there. I ask not for a badge having made the achievement of getting there by public transport, but just to say it was actually hard work. And if I tell you that I spent 35 years working in the public transport industry, if I found it hard work to get the right information, I suspect many of us would have given up much before I did. But thank you to Rebecca and her colleague for that excellent presentation.
Thank you, Justin. Really important point. Simon, is there anybody else?
Yes, there are quite a number, Chair.
Good, bring him on.
I call Mary Morris next, and I shall after that be calling Miriam Croft.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, welcome, Mary. Off you go. Introduce yourself.
Mary Morris, Conservative lay elected. In view of what everyone's said, would it be possible to have all future governing body meetings and diocesan conferences, etc., as a Zoom option for everybody where technology applies? That's basically what I was going to ask.
Thank you. Shall we, Becca, if you could make a note of the questions so that we get them all, you'll deal with them, and then we will take a note, and anything that is above our pay grade, we'll pass over to Simon. Miriam next. Welcome, Miriam.
Hello, Miriam Croft, Bangor Diocese elected. I too chose, because of our climate emergency declaration, to use public transport to get to Newport. And it wasn't a disaster. It was faffy, but it wasn't a disaster. But I was alarmed that the Holiday Inn in Newport had the heating on in the first floor corridor, considering we were in a heat wave and using the air conditioning at the same time.
Thank you. Alarmed and probably sweaty, but I would have been. Next, please.
I next call Andrew Sims, and after that I shall be calling Liz Perkins.
Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Andrew Sims, lay elected Diocese of Llandaff. I'm really struck by all the things that have been said today, and deeply moved to think much more about this in my own life, as well as in the life of our benefice in Canton. I just wanted to flag up to fellow members of the governing body that there is currently funding available, or rather packages equivalent to certain amounts of money, to develop the green spaces that surround some of our churches, and St John's Church in Canton was yesterday awarded a £15,000 garden kit to create a space and environment that will help to absorb some of our carbon, and also to provide a focus for community and an opportunity for Forest Church. And I just thought that that was worth sharing with the governing body, and I will pop a link to that fund in the chat box now, if anybody's interested in applying for that. And if anyone wants to speak about it, I'm also happy to be contacted. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Next. Oh, and Liz. Over to you, Liz. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr I chi. Liz Perkins, elected Bangor. I will be speaking in Welsh. Dwi eisiau deud diolch yn fawr iawn am gyflwyniad arbennig o dda, gwych iawn. Dwi eisiau hefyd just gymryd y cyfle hwn I atgoffa bawb am y cysylltiad rhwng newid hinsawdd a Masnach Deg. Mi ydan ni yn dalaith Masnach Deg, ac da ni wedi ymrwymo'n hunan felly I ddefnyddio pethau fel te a choffi a siwgr Masnach Deg yn cyfarfodydd ac yn heglwysi. Mae newid hinsawdd yn effeithio y clota yn ein byd, y clota yn ein cymunedau, ac mae sefydliadau Masnach Deg yn helpu ffermwyr bregus I ymdopi ac I ddelio hefo y problemau newid hinsawdd. Mae rhan o'r arian felly da chi a fi yn wario ar nwyddau Masnach Deg yn mynd I helpu I ddelio hefo problemau newid hinsawdd. Felly ffordd hawdd I helpu yma ydy I sicrhau yn bod ni yn prynu nwyddau Masnach Deg, nid jyst yn bersonol, ond fel mae'r eglwysi rwan yn ail-agor, a da ni'n mynd I fod yn cael te a choffi ag ati yn yr eglwysi unwaith eto, bod ni'n sicrhau bod y nwyddau yna unwaith eto yn cario y marc Masnach Deg, achos mae o ffordd mor hawdd I wneud gwahaniaeth. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Liz. Who's next?
I next call Andrea Ash, and after that I'll be calling Nigel Doyle.
Welcome, Andrea. Please introduce yourself. Are you able to unmute? Can you unmute, Andrea?
Can I suggest, Chair, that while Andrea is sorting the microphone out, we move to Nigel Doyle.
Nigel Doyle. Over to you, Nigel, please.
Hello, Nigel Doyle, cleric elected Swansea and Brecon. I've said many times at governing body that the whole of my paid working life was dealing and focusing on climate and environmental issues. Within our own ministry area, I'm leading a group looking at building and grant access. And one of the things I keep pushing on people is the buildings we identify that we are going to keep, which is going to be a difficult task in itself. We need to be looking at applying for grants for solar panels, ground source heating and the like. So, because that will also be an income stream. The churches are producing electricity however many hours a day there's going to be light shining on the solar panels. That's not going to be used by the church all the time. So there's an income generation there for selling electricity back into the grid. Thank you very much. That's just a comment to make.
Thank you, Nigel. And again, I think, there's some great ideas coming out. And one of the things I'm going to ask Becca and the whole team to do is to make sure that we actually have a central pile of resources so that we do it once and we share it, collect once, use many, as it were. Andrea, have you had any luck with unmuting yourself?
Andrea's now taken her hand down, Chair.
Right. Okay, Andrea, if you've got problems and you can hear me, then put a comment in the sidebar to everyone if you want to make a point so that we don't lose your contribution. Anybody else waiting, Simon?
Yes, Bishop Andy is next.
Bishop Andy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Bishop Andy, Diocese of Bangor. Two comments, one which is a provincial comment and then one perhaps more local. In terms of the provincial policy, to underline, I think, what Nigel said, the virtue of ground source heating, and the virtue of that is because it's a wet system, so it will largely leave intact many of the pipes which many of our churches rely on. But of course, electricity at the moment is prohibitively expensive. And we're going to need to do some, I think, campaigning with other charities around this issue. If we want to move from largely a fossil fuel based system, we're going to need to undertake a rigorous campaign to see charities enabled to operate in buildings that don't offer a natural way of retaining heat in order for their consumption to be entirely carbon neutral. So just to commend that to Ayab and to Becca. The second thing, I love the idea of the action plan for churches. And one of the critical things we'll need here is to help churches who will, in some of their buildings, struggle, I think, to make the changes around heating that we might long for, but to know what it means, how to translate that deficit into a positive in terms of other things they can do. So this is around planting of trees. This is about supporting organizations which work towards carbon neutral status. That kind of energy and expertise will be so very important. But just to say, Becca, support entirely the action plan. That's a great idea and place to start. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Andy. Any more?
Yes, Chair. I next call Peter Lewis, and he'll be followed by Ian Hibble.
Thank you, Peter. Welcome.
Diolch, fi'n mynd I siarad yn Saesneg. Peter Lewis, elected cleric, Llandaff. I'm really delighted by all the work that's been going on and so much of the practical suggestions which are coming our way. And I'd really encourage everyone to focus on the sense that we've got a great opportunity to feed our discipling of folk who are within our congregations here and within their own life as feeling that they can be agents of influence. So that in addition to all of these very practical, very itemized ideas about looking at how to do environmental kindness, at the same time, we need to be looking at how we can really bless our people to feel that they're being called to change and influence the community around them. So I'd really encourage to keep that balance that we've got starting off as we go ahead, because at the moment, a lot of the focus is on the doing things together. And at the same time, I'd really encourage folk to think about the way we can grow as disciples, and particularly thinking about young people, but also about all the ages of folk who come to us. This is a great opportunity to see God's Spirit grow something new within us as items of people who are in our community who can really help. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And Ian next. Ian Hibble.
Hello, Chair, Governing Body. Hopefully you can all hear me.
Loud and clear. Thank you, Ian.
Lovely. Ian Hibble, lay elected from Llandaff Diocese. It's just an observation, and just to say a massive thank you for this note and the presentation, the very sobering presentation that we received. It's so vitally important for the missional work that we're doing as a church. But it's just an observation I'd like to make around some of the, in particular, one of the note areas where the policy will need action in the following key areas, and it notes some key areas. And one of the observations I'd like to make is around environmental as well as ethical banking? And is there any scope or possibility for Chase or perhaps some of the standing committee to look at some good practice for parishes, ministry areas, to look at how they bank and what the actual banking companies are doing themselves? I'm aware that there's some banks out there that have questionable practice and policy in regards to the environment or unsustainable industries, and it's just something to add to the mix in regards to the discussions. But obviously we invest a lot of money, or the entire running of our parishes via our banks, and although it mentions the procurement of goods and services, it'd be helpful, I think, to have a specific focus on banking in particular. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Anyone waiting?
Yes, next call, Adrian Morgan.
Adrian, welcome.
Thank you, Adrian Morgan, co-opted the Diocese of Swansea and Brecon. Chair, bishops, members of the governing body, I want to welcome this debate. It's obviously an extremely important issue and one that we need to take seriously moving forward. I think that it's essential in the context of this debate, as I've said before, that we have a proper conversation about the sustainability and present and future use of our buildings. I recently preached in a benefice in my own diocese, where the incumbent responsible for more than 20 churches told me that he was travelling hundreds of miles to keep in his words, the show on the road, often ministering to tiny congregations. And whilst I appreciate that buildings for many people across the province have a very emotional part to play in their faith journey, I think governing body would agree with me that our faith isn't vested in bricks and mortar. And so there may be an opportunity within the context of this debate to underline the importance of having perhaps a strategic plan for our buildings across the province and engaging in perhaps a radical programme of education among the laity to consider how we might take seriously this challenge of carbon neutral emissions moving forward. So that's the first point. Secondly, I wanted to ask a question about the Cycle to Work scheme and whether or not that was something the Church in Wales was able to support. My wife, who is a lecturer at Swansea University, was recently able to buy a bike through that scheme and to make use of it on a regular basis. And I want to underline the benefits of that, not simply for the environment, but also physically and for the well-being of clergy and other church workers. Medical practitioners would agree with me that regular exercise is good for mental health and well-being as well as the environment. Is it the case that employees of the Church in Wales can benefit from that already? And if not, what could be put in place to allow them to do so? Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Am I right in thinking that Anthony is waiting?
That's correct.
Right, Anthony Mullins, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. My point is our church is obviously a spiritual home for all the worship.
Anthony, just remind us where you're based.
Sorry. Yeah, Anthony Mullins, elected Llandaff Diocese. I would say our church is our spiritual home and a place where we worship. It also serves the community as a concert venue, and we have a problem with our heating system. We have had the survey done, and we are sort of addressing it. My sort of query is and question, I suppose, is around the faculty system to have work and repairs effected, and the delay or the time it takes to effect those repairs. And I just wondered if there could be something to a piece of work done on reviewing the faculty system and the time it takes, because delay equals deterioration in our experience. That's a simple request to possibly review the faculty system.
Thank you, Anthony. These are all hugely helpful suggestions. And I can see that Becca's still writing. Susan Fogerty has her hand up. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you for this opportunity to contribute to this. Listening to the other speakers.
Just remind us, just introduce yourself, Susan.
Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. Thank you. Yeah, Susan Fogerty, licensed lay minister, Bangor Diocese. Yes, this debate this morning, this contribution has really got me sort of thinking about, what we can do within our own churches. And so thinking about my own concerns of the big church that I attend and knowing that is an all-electric system and there's going to be huge costs once we turn the heating back on after the summer. So that got me thinking, oh, well, perhaps this actually could be a really good way to kind of explain to people within our ministry area and say, actually, there's a good reason why we should come together in the winter and worship in one church, to enable to build up the efficiency of how our ministers are using their time, as well as, this could be a good contribution for ourselves as congregation to engage with the climate and reducing our carbon footprint on that aspect in terms of heating our buildings. But then on the other side, I'm thinking, yes, but then we're going to have more people driving in their cars to get to a single church, perhaps traveling greater distances. So we would need to do that calculation of one versus the other. And so what my question would be to Becca is, how can we, or is there a means by which we can easily try and work out and do those calculations so that we can make the right decisions for the right reasons and not ultimately think that we're doing the right thing for the planet and carbon footprint in one way, and then actually, it turns out we're negating that by, the action. So that's what I'd like to know is, how can we do these sums easily and effectively? Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. And we've got Daniel Starkey, followed by Michael Comore. So Daniel, welcome.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear, thank you.
Yes, Daniel Starkey, elected lay member for Bangor Diocese. And I just had a point regarding travel and the geography of the church in Wales, which is that I was wondering whether we might in the future address the fact that certain parishes and ministry areas in the church in Wales are much closer to the cathedrals of other dioceses than those of their own, and which obviously pushes up their travel costs and travel times, and in turn their sort of carbon emissions massively. Yeah, so just wondering whether at some point we may be able to consider that in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Michael Comore next. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Mike Comore, elected Llandaff. I just want to pick up on the point made by the last but one speaker about the very difficult calculations that actually might need to be made in order to enable us to be as efficient as possibly we can be in terms of energy use. It can be quite easy to be misled sometimes by the zeitgeist. Now, one day I hope to own and use an electric car, as it would seem to be obviously an environmentally sensible option. However, I'm aware that most vehicles use more energy in their manufacture than they ever do in terms of pushing them from one place to another. And that's particularly true, at the moment at least, of electric vehicles. It's been calculated, and I'm sure other people would come up with different figures, that the benefits environmentally only begin to come into play using electric cars against one using a conventional engine once you've exceeded something like 50,000 miles. And so, for example, if you have an electric car and you buy a new one every 2 years, except that most people can't afford to do that, that's much less environmentally friendly than using an old banger and keeping it for 20 years. So it's just point out that if there were a way of making these very difficult calculations with guidance rather than simply using intuition or hunch, that would actually help the church and indeed other organizations in working out how they can be most or as environmentally friendly as they can be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Very helpful. And we have Daniel Priddy waiting. Over to you, Daniel.
Afternoon, Dan Priddy, elected St David's Diocese. Just two really quick points on this for me. Really excited to see the way forwards the Church of Wales is heading, and some of those new roles that have come out. But firstly, building a little bit on what Adrian was saying about the Cycle to Work scheme, there are also schemes for salary sacrifice for electric vehicles for clergy who may be able to contribute to that through national insurance contribution, something again maybe the RB could look at. As I'm aware, many people's churches are further apart than a cyclable distance, to help on that. And the other would be whether there's scope for almost a ring-fenced capital fund for some of these improvements that people have been talking about. We're very aware that in order to decarbonise, we need some quite considerable capital investment in things like solar panels, heating, insulation, changing boilers from gas, etc., etc. And whether there's any scope maybe for the RB to pull together a ring-fenced fund, so where we are making improvements that save us money on the ever-increasing gas and electric bills, that money is recycled into other improvement funds. So rather than kind of reaping the savings financially straight away, we're investing that in more carbon reduction. Whether anything like that could be looked at would be good.
Thank you, Dan. Again, we are hearing a hugely rich number of suggestions. That's all the hands up so far, and we've had a really constructive set of comments. So what I'm going to do is, I think we are drawing to a close on this now. Becca, you know that they say no good deed goes unpunished, so you now have to answer all those. No, I don't want you to answer all of them, but again, you've laid out the plan. It's a starting point. I'll just say that I will want to give you the last word. So if there is one thing you want us all to do from today, just one thing every day from today, after Becca, I will come back to you if there's something you'd like to suggest to us. But Becca, do you want to respond generally to the things that we've heard?
Yes, thank you, Heather. I've been in touch with Julia, so I hope I'm going to do her justice as well on some of these. So Heather, you asked how can we embed good practice, and she would like to refer you back to communication, good practice, sharing locally within dioceses and dioceses sharing with dioceses, publicise your stories, share them with each other, and inspire each other, and bit by bit that will be embedded, hopefully. Justin, Julia would like to say well done. Big commendation on travelling by public transport, and we note your comments and Mary's comments and Miriam's comment, and would like to say that according to the RB environmental policy, all venues chosen in the future will have to have online facilities as well and be accessible. So that looks like it's going ahead, and it is in hand. Andrew, thank you very much for your comments about developing green spaces. Just to add to the link that you put in the chat that I hope people have accessed, Keep Wales Tidy, the Woodland Trust and National Resources Wales also have possibilities. And the Woodland Trust is doing single trees available for the Queen's Jubilee. So every parish can apply for one and you will get a tree to plant. What's not to like with that? We might even make the 86 million trees target that the Welsh Government have put in place. Liz, fantastic reminder about the fair trade. It's a good point to highlight to everybody present and to take back to your ministry areas that Fair Trade Week is the end of February and the beginning of March. So why not take opportunity to link that in very firmly with climate change on a local level? Nigel, I've asked about solar panel grants, and Julia has made a note of it and will follow up. Bishop Andy, Julia says, noted and a great idea about campaigning with other charities, and she loves the ideas of action plans for churches, so we'll follow that up soon. Adrian, the received wisdom is that clergy are not eligible for the Clergy to Work scheme, but the RB legal department is reviewing this, and Julia is meeting with the RB tomorrow, I believe, so hopefully we'll take some of that forward. Anthony, good news. The faculty system is going to be reviewed to take into account net zero. And so Julia is going to add the timescale for review on that as well. Susan, again, good news about the carbon footprint tool that is currently being developed, and it's going to be released before our next governing body meeting. So more news will follow. Please do keep looking at the climate change website on the Church in Wales website. Remember that you can contact Julia directly by pressing the call to action button, but it will also have the regular updates of what's happening. And noted, Daniel, about whether the electric vehicle scheme is possible, and we don't have an answer for that. So Julia's noted that and is going to take that back. I hope I've managed to answer most people. And Daniel Starkey, Julia says, fantastic, very interesting point, and she's noted travel geography down as something to develop.
That's fantastic, and we look forward to you continuing this excellent work with the whole team. And so thank you very much, Becca. Ayub, is there anything that you would like to remind us that we should be doing every day?
Firstly, thank you for allowing me to speak at this special event. It's so encouraging to see that leaders and bodies are taking this issue more seriously. As you just said, if I was to say one thing, I would definitely encourage people to get involved in the Eco Church initiative. I've been learning a lot more about this more recently. I think it's a great an initiative for churches and communities to really get involved with.
Thank you so much. I hope you've seen the comments in the sidebar. Fantastic and inspirational young speaker, very thought-provoking, well presented. Thank you, inspirational, great work. So can I thank you both very much for the fantastic work that's gone into this. This is not the end. This is just an update report. So I think you can see from the reaction that everybody's been very inspired by this. And you take our very good wishes with you to London for your studies, Ayub, and we hope we'll hear more. We've got in Wales, we're fortunate to have the Future Generations Act, and you embody the kind of things that we need in our church and in our country. So thank you so much. That brings to an end our current agenda item number 18. We've got 15 minutes planned before our planned lunch break. Simon, shall we go straight on? Shall I hand over to Liz as chair for the next session, or do you want to make a break now?
Can I just ask Bishop Andy how long you need for the next item?
In terms of, Chair, thank you, Bishop Andy. In terms of presentation, I need no more than about between 5 and 7 minutes.
Can I suggest, Chair, that we take the presentation, see how many questions there are, and then take it over the lunch break, but have Bishop Andy's presentation first, then break for lunch, then take questions afterwards?
In that case, I will, with gratitude, relinquish the chair to my colleague, Mrs. Liz Perkins, and thank you to everybody for your contributions to this session. Over to you, Liz. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Pnawn da, and we're now coming to the final few items of the governing body. Thanks to Paul and to Heather for all that they have done chairing. So now we're going to move to Agenda 19, which is an update on a year of biblical literacy. You've all had a paper for this, and you'll remember that the Reverend Naomi Starkey and the Reverend Kevin Ellis brought this to our attention as a private member's motion last April, and the GB overwhelmingly passed the resolution in favour of making 2022 a year of biblical literacy. So now I'm going to hand over to Bishop Andy, who is going to present us with an update. Bishop.
Chair, thank you very much. Bishop Andy, Bishop of Bangor. I'm going to speak in Welsh to begin with and then switch to English. So, gai ddechrau yn y Gymraeg, os gwelwch yn dda. Mae papur atadol yn ymateb i'r cynnig gan y Corff Llywodraethol i edrych ar mater o flwyddyn o lythrennydd Beiblaidd. A dwi'n mor ddiolchgar i'r grŵp twf yr Eglwys Daleithiol am ei gwaith ar y pwnc yma. A dyn wedi huniaethu 3 peth newydd i'r Eglwys. Yn gyntaf, adnoddau dysgu newydd ac yn ail sgiliau newydd ac yn drydydd wrth gwrs pethau newydd yn y maes o adnoddau digidol. Yn gyntaf, mae adnoddau i ni yn cymeradwyo i'r Corff Llywodraethol yn cynnig pethau arferol i ni, sef y cwrs Beiblaidd sydd yn dilyn alpha, a wedyn rhywbeth i gynnig falle i ni'n dilyn fel Eglwys yr Efengyl yn ôl Sant Luc yn ein prif gwasanaethu. Ac wedyn rhywbeth gwbl newydd, sef blas ar y Beibl. A dwi am dweud rhywbeth bach am hyn yn gyntaf, os gwelwch yn dda. Oherwydd un o'r heriau mwyaf i ni yn yr Eglwys efallai, yw y ffordd i ni'n disgyblu bobl. Nid i fod yn babanod yn ei ffydd, os gai ddweud, ond yn rhywbeth mwy eiddfed yn ei ffydd. Felly mae'r cynnig gyntaf yn gofyn i'r rhwydwaith y twf yr Eglwys Daleithiol i fod yn gyfrifol am oruchwylio hyn fel prosiect pwrpasol. Ac yn ail, nid adnoddau wedyn, ond sgiliau newydd. Ac yma, dyn ni mor ddiolchgar i'r gwaith gan Padarn Sant am ei awgrymiadau. I'm going to switch to English now, if I may, just to unpack that second piece, which is the art of storytelling and the skills that accompany a new telling of our story, if you like. And one of the things that's become clear to us, as we know, as a result of the pandemic, is that we've discovered not only that we can online create new services, but a whole raft of materials. But these materials require a skill set. How good are we at using the art of storytelling or of creating our own podcast so that people in our churches who aren't able to come to church actually hear a really compelling podcast, which is perhaps a story, or it might be an interview, or it might just be some information, which might enable us to expand the way in which scripture becomes real and living for our congregations. And the third thing is to develop the digital base of our life as a church. And here we're immensely grateful to the digital strategy innovation work, which is being developed by the national team, which we hope will not only allow us to have a more seamless and connected corporate approach to our digital life, but will accelerate the range and the kinds of material that will be available for celebrating faith in different ways across the whole of Wales. So this paper is really a starter for 10 Chair. It's to outline 3 areas where we think there are some quick gains for us, and they are all deliverable without any shadow of a doubt. We can have these materials prepared between now and the end of the autumn, so that come the new year, we're able to mark this year of developing our faith together in a real and living way. And I'm really delighted to commend the paper to governing body today for further consideration after lunch. And that's well within my 5 minutes.
Well done, da iawn chi. So I think the suggestion is that we do break now, with a word of thanks to the Bishop for that we break now and come back after lunch with any questions, any comments, any queries. So how long should we have, do you think? Half an hour? Is half an hour enough? Or do people want the full 45 minutes? What do you feel, Simon?
Can I suggest, Chair, that we come back? It's now 12:35. Can I suggest we come back at 1:15?
1:15.
1:15.
Yeah, 1:15. Right, so we are having more or less the full allocation of time for lunch. So go away, have some nice lunch, spend some time in the sun, and we'll see you at 1:15. Diolch yn fawr i chi.